So let me ask you something. How long would it take for you to save for a 20% deposit in today's property market? Well, for most Aussies, it's taking close to a decade. That's 10 years of having to cut back, see your rents go up, and see property prices go higher and higher. And by the time you manage to scrap together the money for a deposit, they've already shifted further and further away. Now, imagine being able to skip all of that. Well, with the government's recently revised first-time homebuyer guaranteed deposit scheme, you can do just that. You can get into the market with just a 5% deposit, and now with no limits at all on how much you can earn, and they've increased the spending caps per state. On the surface, it looks like a lifeline. But here's the reality. It's not just about helping first-time home buyers. When you suddenly make credit significantly easier to access by slashing the deposit hurdles, you're effectively supercharging demand. And in a market that's already short on supply, that could be the spark that lights the fuse under the next Australian property boom. Guys, in this video, I'm gonna run you through exactly how this scheme works, who qualifies, and if you stay right till the very end, I'm gonna give you my thoughts on what this means for house prices across the next 12 months. I'll also give you clear scenarios so you know what to expect no matter how this plays out. Guys, my name's Josh, I'm from DataEdge Property, and I help everyday Australians grow their wealth in the Australian property market using data. Data that's accessible to absolutely everyone. And with that being said, let's jump straight into the video. So how does this scheme actually work? Well, when you typically purchase property, you're required to provide an upfront equity contribution known as a deposit, and that amounts typically 20%. Well, under this scheme, the government effectively comes in and they guarantee 15% of your loan. And as a result, you're only required to provide a deposit for that gap, that 5% gap. And unlike typical high LVR scenarios, such as this one where you're gonna be gearing up to 95%, you're not actually required to pay LMI under this scheme, which is a massive advantage. That's at least $20,000 to $30,000 in savings. For those that don't know, LMI is lender's mortgage insurance. Effectively, it's an insurance that you're required to take out on behalf of the bank to insure it against any losses should you default on your loan. Now, who's eligible for this scheme? Well, as long as you're over the age of 18, you're an Australian citizen, and you're a first-time home buyer entering into a P&I loan, you're eligible. One of the key differences of this iteration of the scheme is that they've removed any income caps. So there used to be income limits, those have now been thrown out the window. And on top of that, there's no place limits anymore. So under the old scheme, there was a limit of 35,000 people. Now it's completely unlimited. Now, the last limitation is around these price caps per state. So I'll bring up this chart that's straight from their website, and it shows you each state and the relevant property price cap, what it used to be and what it is now. So to give you an example, let's have a look at New South Wales. And again, this is capital cities or regional centers. So this is probably the most profound change in terms of the various states, where the limit used to be $900,000. That's now gone to a whopping $1.5 million, almost doubled in value. Victoria has only modestly gone up from 800 to 950K. Queensland's gone up quite materially from 700K to $1 million. In terms of the other capital cities, Western Australia, that's also gone up. So for anyone in Perth, you can now take advantage of this scheme anywhere up to $850,000. That's gone up from 600K. And again, you can have a look at this chart for your relevant capital city, but across the board, the eligibility caps per state have been increased. Now, an even more interesting chart is this one from Cotality. And what it shows you is the portion of suburbs that have a median value equal to or below the new price caps. And it has that split up by state. So this is quite profound. You can actually see, depending on which state you're in, the proportion of suburbs that actually qualify for this scheme. So just having a quick glance at it, I can see straight up that Sydney, almost half of the suburbs where there are houses, qualify for this scheme. Places like Hobart is even 52%. Whereas when you're looking at places like Perth, well, it's pretty low at 38%. But then when you look at regional, this is probably the biggest eye-opener. You've got places like regional New South Wales and regional Victoria where up to 70% of suburbs in those areas are eligible for the scheme. So that's a lot of suburbs that are going to qualify for this scheme. And here's the kicker. The number of new entrants into the Australian property market as a result of this increased eligibility criteria, they're not just numbers on a page. That's tens of thousands of extra buyers who are now able to access Australia's property markets. So the question is, why does this change the game? Well, effectively, what it means is that people who thought that they were years away from being able to purchase a property, well, they're now able to get into the market. And as a result, urgency kicks in. There's this feeling of, well, I better get a spot now or I'm gonna miss out. And that behavior, it begins to permeate the market. Effectively what happens is even those buyers that aren't eligible for the scheme, they begin to feel FOMO because they see others getting into the market who they thought never would be able to get into the market. And all of a sudden, even if they're not eligible now, they're gonna do anything that they can to make themselves qualify for the criteria and be able to take advantage of the scheme. And when this scheme goes live on October 1st, you're gonna see it in the headlines everywhere. So this FOMO is going to be rampant. Now, at the same time as that, it's all happening as rates ease, borrowing power improves, and supply still stays very tight. Now, if you wanna see how this dynamic is playing out on the ground, you should have a look at Perth. It's the nation's strongest market right now. I've actually recently done a full video on Perth, its data, and my 12-month forecast. So if you're interested, you should check that one out in the description box below. Now, in a second, I'm gonna show you how this price pressure at the entry level doesn't just stop there. It actually permeates all the way through the various price levels in the market. So what impact could this have on prices? Well, firstly, you're going to have a demand shock at the entry tier. So at the very bottom of these price maps, all of a sudden, you're going to see faster sales, fewer days on market, and intense competition. And that competition is going to translate into higher and higher prices. Secondly, you're going to see a ripple effect. You're going to see first-time home buyers push up the lower end, upgraders gain equity, and then as a result, the mid-market rises. It's not just going to stop at the lower end of the market. Remember, supply is still constrained. Approvals and completions are well below target. The government's target of getting 1 million homes built over the next 10 years is well short of expectations. So this scheme, it's a demand side factor and it's come at a time where supply is at its most constrained. So what's the most likely outcome? Well, it's pretty simple. You're gonna see quicker than expected national price growth over the next 12 months. But before we can call it all upside, let's talk about the risks because not everyone's gonna come out as a winner. So what are the risks that you need to be aware of? Well, firstly, you need to be aware of equity risk. So unlike the typical scenario where you've provided a 20% deposit, here you've only put a 5% deposit down. So if there's any market fluctuations and for whatever reason prices go down, well, you're gonna be on the hook and you might find yourself in a situation where you're in negative equity. And that's all fine if you've got job security, if you don't have to sell, if you can ride out those market cycles. But if you're in a position where for whatever reason you might lose your job, that's a major financial risk. Secondly, individuals are gonna potentially stretch their repayments. Again, when you're borrowing 95%, you're borrowing a significantly more material amount than when you borrow at 80% and your repayments are gonna be higher. So you need to make sure that you can actually afford your repayments at that higher debt level. And that's something that you should absolutely be sitting down with a financial planner and doing the numbers on. Now, the other risk is what I call cap cliffs. And what I mean by that is that typically when these schemes come out, you see a lot of crowding just under the price cap point at say $699 if the cap's $700 or $698. And when you're in a buying frenzy, it's very easy to overpay just because you're eligible for a scheme at a certain amount. But a property might only be worth $650. So you don't want to be caught up in a situation where a bunch of buyers are happy to pay all the way up to $699, but they end up overpaying for a property, and that's a genuine risk with this scheme. Now, the last risk is artificial timing. So Typically when these schemes come out, a lot of the demand is on the front end. And what that means is a lot of the price movement happens at the beginning, and then in say 12, 18 months from now, those who get in very late, they are potentially already paying very elevated prices and the market has already shifted. So again, you don't want to be getting into a market too late after the majority of the price movement has already occurred, unless you're willing to hold on to that asset for a very, very long term. And this is why I keep banging on in my videos about due diligence. It's not just about getting in fast, it's about buying the right asset for the right value and at the right time. If you haven't already, grab my free property due diligence checklist in the description. It's completely free and it's the exact framework that I use to rule out bad assets. Okay, so with all that said, what does it mean for the next 12 months? Well, under my base case scenario, I'm expecting that national home prices will go up 6 to 8% over the next 12 months as demand lifts and supply stays tight. Now, in my upside scenario, and this would require for interest rates to go down at least 1 or 2 more times, and listings to remain very scarce at the national level, I could see national home prices go up over 10%. It would be a true national housing boom, something that we haven't seen since COVID. Now, the downside scenario, and just to be upfront, I don't hold a lot of faith in this particular scenario, but if for whatever reason we see some major external shock in the economy and that shock causes unemployment to rise sharply or stock levels to rebound for some reason, well, under that scenario, we'll still see gains most likely, but they'll probably be more moderate, between 2 to 4%. Now, if this breakdown's helping you cut through the noise, please hit the like button down below. It genuinely helps more people see this data-driven content, and make sure you subscribe so that you see more videos like this. So with that said, who's most likely to win from this scheme and who could potentially get stung? Well, the likely winners, and again, this is if they execute well, are likely to be early applicants in tight sub-cap pockets who secure quality stock before the bidding wars ensue. So the key there is you need to get in early. The other likely winners are entry-level sellers who are close to that cap threshold. Again, what they're going to see is all of a sudden this flurry of demand for their property that wasn't there before, and that demand is going to push up prices and push up the ultimate sale price in those properties. Lastly, it'll be upgraders. Individuals who are going to bank a bunch of equity in the next 12 months as a result of this scheme, and it'll position them to invest or to purchase other assets in the future. Now, with that being said, who could get stung by this scheme? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it'll be those people who are just near the caps who potentially overpay. They pay more than what the property is actually worth. And as a result, they enter into a market and from day one, they've got negative equity. Secondly, I can see this scheme creating a bunch of mortgage prisoners. When you enter into a property market at a 95% LVR, the downside risks are quite high if things don't pan out, if you don't have strong job security, if for whatever reason you can't meet your repayments. You might potentially find yourself in a space where you're forced to sell, but the value of the asset isn't enough to cover the amount of the loan. The other group that could potentially get stung are off the plan buyers who again are close to those price caps, because they're going to potentially enter into a contract on the basis they're going to get the scheme, but that settlement might be 12 or 18 months away, and settlement valuations can actually come in short. You can also get build delays or building failures, which can create cash shocks. So if you're buying off the plan and you're going to be taking advantage of this scheme, just be careful. Lastly, it's going to be those latecomers into the market. So some people are going to be chasing headlines in 6 or 12 months time after everyone who knew about the schemes already purchased, pushed prices up. And again, you don't want to be the last person that enters the market after this scheme's already been in operation for 12 to 18 months because of all of the reasons that I've just mentioned. So here's the bottom line. The 5% deposit scheme is going to open up the floodgates. In a market that's already short on supply, it risks kicking off another price wave of growth. Now, some buyers are going to ride that wave, and others could get stung by thin buffers, cap cliffs, or an average asset that's dressed up to take advantage of the scheme. Now, I really appreciate you sticking around to the end. My goal is to cut through all of the noise and help you make smarter property decisions. Now, if you got value from this video, the absolute best way to support this channel is to hit the like button down below and also hit the subscribe button. And that way you're gonna see more content just like this. Guys, thanks for watching the video and I'll see you in the next one.